So, Neeraj, welcome to our Entrepreneurial Life Design. We're so happy to have you here, live from the Bay Area, I guess. And it would be great if you are introducing yourself and what the human capital formation is all about.
Great. Yes, so I'm happy to do that. So I have a deck which has a little bit of a slide introduction. So let me just get to that. So yeah, let's share my screen here. See, yes. Okay, here we go. So, great. So hello everyone. I'm Neeraj Sonalkar, and today I'll share a bit about a course that I have been part of. For the past 5 years, from 2018 through actually 6 years now. Through 2023. So as Bettina said, a little bit about my introduction. So I started my professional journey in the engineering space. So I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I did a lot of product development. Worked with Lockheed Martin, Infosys, developed products on the medical device side. I was also very much interested in social impact. So I did a bit of work on developing pumps for low-income farmers in Myanmar. So I've been around the product block a few times. But while developing products, I got really interested not just in the products themselves, but the people. Who are these people who are developing the products, and how do they work together? What kind of teams are more effective at developing products? And that led me to research. So I started researching innovation teams. And while doing team research, I realized that it's not just the teams, it's the companies, it's the ecosystem that they are part of. So that led me to building innovation ecosystems. I was part of teams at Stanford that set up venture design centers in Nigeria and in Ahmedabad in India to foster a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation. And a lot of it was, it's not about how do you crank out ventures or startups. It's not about how do you crank out products. It's about the environment. How do you create environments where people can feel empowered to build products, to build companies? Uh, Along the way, this focus on the people side led me to create this new group at Stanford, Human Innovation Design, looking at the human aspects underlying innovation. It was just about the time when we were invited by DB Sistel, subsidiary of Deutsche Bahn, to help them in their agile transformation. It was an interesting experience, working with this 4,000 person IT company with mixed results. And we can talk about that later. But at the same time, I have been around the venture space, a little bit corporate consulting space. So this firm I started working with, Sozo Ventures, invited me to see, how might we optimize corporate startup partnerships? What's the edge between these two groups? How do they interact together? And I did a bit of work there. And that led me to start my own company in 2022 to establish leadership and culture in scaling startups. Saying, is there a product we can create for scaling companies that would help them lay the foundation for their human side, for their people side, much more effectively? And we were not able to create that product. So, around the time, what we realized was that it's difficult for a product to do leadership. It's difficult for a consultant to do leadership. It has to be done through demonstration. So I stopped that, and I currently am actually working in healthcare space, leading an innovation lab at a local medical center. The purpose is to demonstrate, through hands-on work, what innovation could be, and to create a role model. So all throughout my journey, I've been really influenced by this pursuit. How can people collaborate joyfully, effectively to pursue innovation? That's my true north. That's what I'm here for. So all throughout this, I'll tell you how I came upon this capital formation, which is the topic of today's discussion. So when I was doing these centers, oh, go ahead. Yes, Barbara.
Sorry to interrupt, but you said you want to show us slides. I don't know if you show us slides because I only see your browser window.
Oh, you do? Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, thank you for telling me that. Yes.
Yes,
I see the slides. I see
the slides, Barbara.
Oh, that's strange.
How I
came
up upon capital formation. Everything works for us. Something is wrong on your side.
Then I go out and in again. That's strange.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I try it again.
Someone else has this challenge?
No.
No. Okay.
Okay, let me know, Barbara, if it doesn't work. I mean, that's a bit odd. I've never seen that on Zoom before. That we have two different streams of output. So should I pause for Barbara to join or continue?
We're taping it, so Barbara.
Taping it. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Got it. So I came upon capital formation mainly because of my work in the innovation ecosystem design space. We realized that some of the greatest failures happen in relationships between those who had capital and those who were seeking it. People always came with good intentions to the table till capital was put on the table. And then when there was money, when there was funding, behavior changed. So I got really curious about what money does to us, and I started seeking people who had similar mindsets. And I found a group of people, venture investors in Bay Area, who had realized this that dysfunctional capital, is one of the big problems in innovation. And what they meant by that was that some of the venture investors who support founders, who sit on boards of companies, lack the leadership and lack the maturity to actually shepherd them to success. So they created a program called Kaufman Fellows Program. It's a program for training venture investors. And I believe this was created in the mid 90s and has since then become quite successful as a fellowship. So I started working with Phil Wickham, who was the former CEO of the Kaufman Fellows Program. And he and I and Ade Mabugunje and one more friend of ours, Greg Horowitz, we started thinking, okay, now how do we take this knowledge which is there in for capital formation in the Kaufman Fellows Program and make it more broadly accessible? So that's where this course came up. In 2018, we did a pilot, and then since then we have been teaching this course at Stanford University. So what I'll do now is share very briefly what this course is about, and then we can get into a conversation about how it relates to the work that you are doing in entrepreneurial life design. So this is the course, Capital Formation, the science of capital formation. It's in the mechanical engineering group, basically because I and they have been part of the mechanical engineering design group. And the core premise of this course is, through this visual. So this is a graph of which tells you the returns in the venture investment space. So a lot of this course is coming from the venture capital lens, so that's a lens that we have to keep in mind. So what you see here is on the x-axis is the return on investment you get. And on the y-axis, the number of CEOs equates to the number of startups, let's say, right? So this tells you that more than 65%. This is not very exactly clear. Okay. But 65% or so startups return less than the capital invested in them. The next 25% return 1 to 5x. The next 6% return 5 to 10x, and the top 4% return 10x or more. And this was a study done through Correlation Ventures in 25,000 funding rounds. There was one more view which I really like. Similar data, which is now flipped on the axis, but this is the total count of realized multiples, so number of startups once again, and then what's the return. So here 61.84% of startups returned less than the capital invested. The next 24.52 return 1.5x, the next 6 5 to 10x, 6.14 10 to 100x. The top 1.5% of startups return greater than 100x capital. So a lot of the investment space, the venture space, is predicated on these graphs. Is that how do we get to this top 1.5%? And the reason why I show these graphs is that this is very different than the space that I was trained in. I was trained as a mechanical engineer. I was more familiar with manufacturing. In manufacturing, you want to have, better than Six Sigma standard of quality. So, if you are designing 100,000 Porsches, you want, 100,000 Porsches to be exactly the same and to perform equally well. If we were to follow this venture standard, out of 100,000 Porsche, only 2 of them might work, or maybe 10, and the rest of them would have varying degrees of performance. That's just not acceptable in manufacturing. It's just weird. But that's what the innovation space is that the performance is extremely variable. And that just doesn't so the question for a lot of venture investors is, okay, given this variation in performance, what do we need to do to get here? And a lot of it is behavioral in nature. How do the people who might actually get here behave? What kind of teams they form, what kind of culture they have, what kind of ecosystem they have, what kind of relationships they build. And that's what they mean by saying that what capital formation is, it's not that it's not an input of capital and an output of capital, but a lot of times the ingredients for forming great companies are human in nature. Capital is just something that facilitates the process. So a lot of the course is saying, what are the behaviors that get you here? What's the kind of leadership that you need? What's the kind of foundership that you need? So this is the 2 curves I showed you are known as power law distributions, and you can find articles out in literature about power law. And power law distribution is not something just restricted to startups. A lot of human activity is governed by power law. So athletes, performances, salaries, Emmy nominations. There's a whole bunch of them. But this is to show that a lot of our human professional fields are not governed by equity. They're governed by power law distributions where the top performers have exponentially more rewards and more outcomes than the rest combined. So given this power law distribution, the question is, how do you design and fuel your rocket, your company and yourself to perform in the top 4%, 1.5%? And the course, we show this picture. The course is designed as a gym. It's designed as a fitness metaphor. It's not to show that that there is something wrong that you have to correct, but there is something that you can be better at. So understanding fitness, that you have to practice, you have to build up your muscles every day to get to the top 4%, to get to the top 1.5%. That's what this is about. So and knowing that, one reframing that we do is to say that capital is not just money. Capital is not transactional. It's a system of continuous and embodied practices, not a set of transactions. This was very new to me. I don't come from a business family. We have not done business, and we don't have a transactional mindset. So when I came here, I thought of, okay, venture investors, you do deals, a lot of that language calls for deal flow, deal making. But underlying that language is an understanding that it's a system of continuous embodied practices. So in this class, we have this framework that we use. We start with intent. How do you clarify intent? How do you communicate intent? Once you have intent clarified and communicated, you get to the design of products, design of business models, design of organizations. And then we come to what forms of capital you might need to mobilize. And then through what relationships would you mobilize these forms of capital? And while you're doing that, your intent gets sharpened, which is why this is a cycle. And this is modeled on thermodynamics, power cycles, which is why we use the word power cycle here. That this is where energy, value, capital is created. So I mentioned this before, one view that we have about nourishment that you saw in a previous slide is to take this perspective that organizations are biological entities. You may start off as a solo founder or with a team, and then you slowly build up, your team. You hire your first employees, executives. You go from 5 people to 10 to 100 to 1,000. Each of these stages is like a stage in a human being's growth, through being a fetus, a baby, a toddler, preschooler, primary schooler, adolescent, adult, and so on. And the key thing to note is that at each point, as a human being, you need different kinds of nourishment. A baby requires nourishment at a very different level than a preschooler. I have a daughter who is 4, so she requires equal bit of love and discipline. uh, you know, uh, Once you have a teenager, that requires, she would require a different kind of nourishment. So capital is equated to nourishment in a sense that as a founder, as an organizational leader, as an investor, how do I nourish the companies that I want to grow? And what kind of nourishment do they need? Do they need better culture? Do they need financial support? Do they need legal support? Do they need process? Do they need people? So these are all forms of capital that we look at. And building on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, my friend Phil Wickham, he came up with different forms of capital. Uh, I can send you the link to this article that he wrote in 2015 in the Kaufman Fellows report. But he created a hierarchy, which in my mind is not a hierarchy, but more a spectrum. So I wouldn't have put it like a triangle. I would have just put it like a column. It's a spectrum, really, which goes from human forms of capital to intellectual forms of capital, financial forms of capital, process forms of capital, and cultural forms of capital. So what was really powerful to me about this course was to equate capital with my own understanding of energy from thermodynamics. So just as energy exists in different forms, kinetic, potential, electrical, nuclear, and so on, capital exists in different forms. It's not just money, which is just one manifestation of capital. And a lot of capital formation is about having the skill to understand how to convert capital from one form into another and what it takes to do that. So these are just some of the questions. These are slides from the course. These are some of the questions we discussed in the first session of the course. What's your greatest act of organizational nourishment? Who comprises your board of nourishers? How do they serve the design of your intent? How could you enhance your board? So let me go forward to, I don't know if I have this. Okay, I wanted to show you this one. So these are some of the topics we cover in the course. Coming back to the capital formation power cycle. When we talk about intent, a lot of it is about clarity, is about self-awareness. It's about developing self-awareness. So we spend quite a bit of time on using some of the tools for developing self-awareness. So conscious leadership is one of them. I'm happy to send you the link to this, to their body of materials. But conscious leadership is a form or a group of people who are saying, how can we become more self-aware as leaders on what influence we have on people and what influence people have on us? How do we get triggered? How do we get reactive? And how do we shift out of those mindsets? So they have a body of tools, methods, and frameworks. We use this tool, Enneagram. When I started this course with Phil, this was the first time I heard about Enneagram. I had taken some courses in personality psychology during my graduate studies, and this would not pass the test of an academic standard of personality. But Enneagram is interesting because I've seen a lot of investors use that, and some of the founders that I've met also attest that this has been quite useful to them. So I went along with the flow and started using that in this course. And it's been an interesting experience to see what Enneagram can bring instead of or complementary to what other assessments do. We use one tool called Scarf, which is about what are the triggers that you have, and I'll get into that a bit more. Flow states from Mihail Csikszentmihalyi's work, and one of the people we work with, Gay Hendricks, has framed it as zones of genius, and then clarifying purpose, which at a smaller level goes towards intent. And then when it comes to design, we talk about organizational design, navigating ecosystems that you're part of, business models and key drivers. This is something more familiar to us coming from a design side. And then when it comes to capital, is the forms of capital, which I mentioned, and then how to mobilize them through networks, legal and financial. And there is a lot of role models and simulation that we do on the relationship front. So what I'll do in the next few slides is go a bit deeper on the intent piece. If I look at the comments that students have who have taken this course and the testimonials they give, most of them get the greatest value from intent. Because that self-awareness perhaps is something which they don't get in the rest of the courses they take at Stanford. So we use this model of this metaphor of a rocket. When you want to send up a rocket up, you need to have trust. Thrust is what drives you forward, and then there is weight, which serves as a drag. And if you want to build a good rocket, you need to maximize thrust, minimize drag. And a lot of it has to do with you as a rocket, as a person. Enneagram is something that clarifies that to some extent, is where does your energy lie? How do you show up when you get triggered? How do you show up when you are the best self? And what motivates that? Which is what this Enneagram tool has been helpful for. We use this tool, State of Wonder. It's from Patrick Lencioni. If you may have come across his work, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, he was quite famous for that. He developed an assessment for zones of genius, I think. Once again, I'm happy to send you the link later. So we use that too. Gay Hendricks zone of genius is aligned with that. We use a tool for purpose from conscious leadership, and for sources of drag, we look at SCARF model and upper limit problem. I'll get to SCARF in the later slides. But the fundamental belief for the first part, the intent part, is this: is that if you lack self-awareness and behavioral fitness, the organization that you're creating doesn't have a great chance of making impact. Zero chance of making the 4%. You could make some impact. You could have 1x return, 5x return. But if you're looking to be exponentially more effective, we need to have deep self-awareness. And this is where, we spend at least, I believe, the first 4 sessions out of 10. So some of the patterns we look at: personality, once again, to do Enneagram, wonder and drama through zones of genius, through conscious leadership. Above the line, below the line is once again a framework from conscious leadership. And then SCARF relates to this prefrontal cortex, amygdala, which, if I really look into it from an academic lens, can be a bit of pop psychology. But it is still effective to get at what is it that triggers you. So for those who are not familiar with Enneagram, Enneagram is a system of assessment that is divided into 9 different categories. And once you go through that assessment, that you come up with a result saying, okay, that you could be type 1 or type 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. This is not to say that you are just that type. It's to say that that's one of the dominant things that may show up in your behavior. We are all of these types from 1 to 9. But for example, when I did this assessment with a coach, I was he mentioned that it is likely that I am type 7. So which was a surprise to me, because I'm not very spontaneous, versatile, acquisitive, and scattered. Though when I really think about it, I am. So it was also interesting to note that. What I think that the Enneagram does, which rest of the assessments which I've seen have not, is to show that when you are stressed, how does your behavior change? So there's two states in Enneagram. There's a basic state, and then when you are stressed, you show up as a different type. When you are in an expanded state, in your natural state, you show up as a different one. So I am type 7 according to Enneagram, and when I get stressed, I show up as type 1. So type 1 is principled, purposeful, self-controlled, and perfectionist. So I become very controlling. I become very demanding. I start looking at details and become quite principled when I become stressed. When I'm more in an expanded state, type 7 goes to type 5. So I show up more as perceptive, innovative, but also a bit secretive and isolated. And reflecting on this, yes, it does seem to somewhat correlate with my experience. But once again, perhaps because I'm type 7, or perhaps not, I hate being bucketed into these various types. So my experience has been that, this is useful to some extent, but I wouldn't hold on to it very strongly. And that's what I tell the students that we work with. Take what you can from it, but don't read too much into it. All of these tools have a limitation. The other one we look at, zone of genius, correlated with Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow. It says that we have 4 zones. We have zone of incompetence, some things that we are really not good at doing. We have zone of competence, something that we can do okay, well, but they are just well. We have zone of excellence, things that we are trained at doing. So I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm trained at engineering analysis, FMEA, and so on. And I have a zone of excellence for that. But there's also a zone of genius, something that comes very naturally to us, effortlessly to us, that other people say, oh, how do you do that? Which we may be trained at, or we may not be trained at. But what this tells you is that figuring out what is your zone of genius is very critical if you want to get into that top 4% or that top 1.5%, because that becomes your superpower. So for founders, for innovators, how do we spend more and more time here and less time in these two zones, and maybe some amount of time here, but really drive our activities towards our zones of genius? So we do a tool where we get to zones of genius. This is from Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's flow. So I'll just skip that. I think we may have seen that. So the purpose for showing the zone of genius in this class is to let the students think about, how are their activities organized? How do they spend the rest their days, their weeks, and what their zones of genius might be? And that reflection in itself is helpful for people to identify what they're not good at, what they would like to do more of, and reorganize their calendars if possible. This is the scarf tool that we talk about. So that comes from this person, David Rock, who runs a center where he has based a lot of his theories on some of the functions and findings from neuroscience. What I really like about is that he has narrowed down his tool to a set of triggers, which is this SCARF. So status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness, which forms the word SCARF. The tool, his framework says that, we get, as human beings, we have certain triggers that if we have a loss of status, we get triggered. If we have a loss of certainty, we get triggered. If we have a loss of autonomy, we get triggered. If we have a loss of relatedness, we get triggered. Or a loss of fairness, we get triggered. But we don't get triggered to the same extent for each of them. For some of us, it may be status. If we lose status, we immediately are threatened. We feel a threat. For some of us, it's certainty. For some of us, it's autonomy. For some, it's a combination of these five. So understanding what triggers us can be really helpful to that once we get into a situation where we perceive threat, we are not just activating our emotional responses, but we have a sense of what can we do cognitively to come out of this sense of threat. So we go through this tool where we get scores for each of them, and we get to say which of it is triggering us. My own experience has been that this is helpful for me once again to know, not to do. The practice can be a bit tricky, but understanding that what is it that triggers me it's useful to some extent. In my own case, my triggers are this is the capital A, autonomy. If I perceive lack of autonomy, I am not in a good place. And that makes sense. As an innovator, as a founder of organizations, I have really put myself in places where I have autonomy. I really don't care about status, and definitely not about certainty. But knowing that helps me get into situations and be careful how I set up boundaries where the autonomy is not threatened a lot. So that's for scarf. And the second one, interesting, he says, don't get too happy. Upper limit problem. So this is a principle or a perspective championed by this person called Gay Hendricks, who runs the Hendricks Institute. He was initially at Stanford, a lecturer at Stanford, and then got too bound up in the academic space, so he left it and started his own organization. His perspective that he shares in the upper limit problem is that his observation is that as human beings, we have an upper limit to how happy we can be. And that limit is set by, the circumstances we grow up in, our families, our friends, our ecosystem. And if things start going extremely well and we tend to get more happy than we are used to, we self-sabotage. So we do things to not be too happy. We start to worry, we start to get anxious, we start to find flaws, but we do things where we actually limit the happiness that we could have. So what this tool and this framework gets us to reflect on is what can be our upper limits, and how do we sabotage ourselves at times. It can be through procrastination, it can be through doubt, it can be through anxiety, or any number of ways. But this has been helpful once again for students to think about what do they do that might be limiting their performance, which is why this is on the drag side, the weight side of things. So once again, this is about scarf. Let's keep that, let's mention that. Let me share with you the brief schedule for the course. So this is a 10-week course. We start off with an introduction. So the slides which I've shown you are a few of the slides we have within the first session. But the key thing is that we bring a student who has taken this course before to share her experience. And that perhaps is the most important thing. It's not the content, it's the people who have gone through it and are able to share what this course meant for them and how it changed them or it didn't, and to share their stories, to interact with the current cohort and so on. So we spent some time there. One thing to note is that this course is called Capital Formation, though it's a very different definition of capital. So a lot of students who come to it expect to get financial training, when they realize this is really a course about leadership, in the frame of capital, but it's not about finance. So we have some students who leave, they self-select out when they realize that, which is good, which is why we have the first session to tell them, okay, now that you're in, this is what it's about. The second and the third sessions, we spend quite a bit on the self-awareness, the intent side. So we bring in Diana Chapman from Conscious Leadership, who does an excellent session on the frameworks of conscious leadership. And we bring in people like Bill Tobin, who is a coach friend of ours, who does self-discovery, synthesis, SCARF, upper limit, zone of genius. The session 4 is something which I have tended to lead in the past, design of organizations. So looking at, what do you need to do to think of organizations as something that can be designed, that should be designed? What are some of the factors that you look into it for? We bring in actual CEOs to talk about their learnings. So all throughout the course, we have guest speakers who come in. They tend to be experienced and successful, or sometimes failed founders, investors, who very openly share their journeys and their stories, which has been perhaps the most valuable thing in this course. We talk about navigating ecosystems, organizational talent, and execution. Once again, these topics are not done through a lot of frameworks. They are done through bringing in the people who are experts and who have lived those situations. So if you think about it, this course is not like a course in physics or a course in other aspects of engineering and so on. It's not about the content so much as about the people. So we say that this is a course where you can model things. You hear a founder talk about her journey, and you say, okay, now what is the model of this founder, and how my model of being a leader, of being a capital formation expert, how does it differ or is similar to that person? What can I learn from that person, and what can I differ from that person? So we spend quite a bit of time bringing in speakers and doing this. Beyond these 10 weeks sessions, we also have what we call as studio sessions. So what it means is that this is a 30-person course now. So we break the course into forums or peer sessions of around 7 or 8 students who meet weekly every Fridays, and they talk about their own aspirations. If they have an idea they are working on for their company or a project at school, they talk about what they are working on and think about how they can nourish that project, nourish that organization, and what forms of capital they can deploy for them. And it's really an opportunity for peer learning and peer interaction, so they can learn from each other. And the teaching team is more of a facilitator in terms of asking the right questions. So these are some testimonials. It's turned out to be a way more busy slide than I anticipated. But maybe you can spend some time reading it, get a sense of what to take out of this course. So let me pause speaking while you read this. So when I reflect on these testimonials and what's the impact of this course on students, I see that there are certain, after seeing it in action for the last 6 times, the 6 cycles of this course, I've seen that the students tend to follow certain archetypes. So one archetype of student is somebody who comes in with a strong idea that they want to pursue. Maybe it's a startup they want to do, or they have actively started working on it. And this course seems to reinforce that. It seems to give them greater energy, get greater focus, and they pursue it much more passionately. And that's been one journey that that students have. The second journey is that students once again come up with certain idea, but it's not as strongly held. There's not a lot of conviction. Maybe it's driven a lot externally. Like, okay, there's a lot of trends about artificial intelligence, AI, generative AI. So students say, okay, we want to do something in artificial intelligence, but this course helps them reflect, is it really what you want to do? And when they start asking those questions and digging deeper into their intent, they realize that not really, this is not what I want to do. And so they stop and they abandon what they are working on. And once they abandon it, they may find something else or they might not. But the effect of the course is to actually clarify their intent and not just be validated through external sources. The third journey that students have is some of the students are not sure what they want to do. They may have something in mind, but they're hesitant to work on it. They're hesitant because it doesn't fit in with their ideas of what founders should be doing, or they feel that they are lacking certain skills. But through participation in their course, they realize that they can actually start working on it and might make some progress. So they get empowered, they get excited, they get energized, and they start doing those things. We had a student who was in an architectural student. She wanted to start her own architectural firm, which was not just about architecture, but also considered its impact on human performance. And she said, how can I do that? I'm just a student. So, but she had a good concept in mind. And by participating in this course, she got much more energized and empowered to actually put it into action. Uh, so that's one archetype. And the third archetype, what I have seen is students who take this course, and they go through it, they learn some of those things about self-awareness. They're not sure what they want to do in the beginning, they're not sure what they want to do at the end of the course, but the course serves as something like a bookmark about their development. And what I've seen is that they tend to be around 10 or 20% of the cohort. um, but when I look at their performance later on, if I meet them 2 years down the line or 5 years down the line, they come up and say, oh, this course really helped them. Though at the moment of taking the course, it was not really clear how. So one of the things that we have seen is that sometimes it has an impact which is delayed. So my own reflections on this has been that this has been a fascinating experience for me, basically because it helped me reframe what capital is. Coming into the picture, it really expanded my own definition of capital and capital formation. And I am grateful that now I feel that it's not just about money. So when I want to, let's say, start a new company, I just don't look at the money side of things. I feel empowered that the social capital, what I have, the relationships that I'm building, are all part of the same spectrum. And that empowerment is really helpful. It's effective. So that's been one thing that the course has done. On the other end, I sometimes worry about this word capital. Is that the right word still that we are after? Because it has a very strong connotation in the world outside. And it does have a transactional connotation. We're trying to reframe it, and it means certain in a thing that's more expanded to a certain group of people, but not to the rest of the world. So I'm not exactly still sure if it's not being transactional in nature or serving the interests of investors only. So, how do we make it perhaps expand it even beyond these limitations of the word capital itself? So those are some of the reflections, and I am curious to now, move to conversation to see, what does this perspective that I have shared, the course that I've shared, what does it bring to entrepreneurial life design? So thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Niraj. That was quite a firework. I was taping with Barbara all the time. A lot of things that are coming to my mind, but because we know each other, and I have to promise Barbara and myself, we already said we have to get in contact with you. And the time is limited. Is there something you are looking for before we are open the Q&A session? So what do you need? Where do you need currently help with?
Got it. Good. So I don't need help as such in certain things, but I am curious about, what I'm curious about currently is how do you form conviction?
Can you elaborate conviction to whom?
So conviction about pursuing a certain path of action. Maybe that could be forming a company, maybe that could be starting a project, taking on a job of a certain kind. How do you form conviction?
How do you?
Perhaps it's my own nature. Yeah, conviction is, like a strong belief that, okay, this is what I want to be doing, which goes towards the intent side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that I've seen that there is a lot in the venture space, in the innovation space, a lot of fear of missing out, FOMO, as they say in the venture world. There's a lot of saying, okay, following the trends. But I'm thinking that for real entrepreneurs who are pursuing something meaningful, the people that I am attracted to serving are people who have conviction about their own beliefs and what work they want to be doing. So I'm always curious about conviction, especially because sometimes I'm not able to form one for myself. That what should I be doing next? And I always feel that I'm pursuing one thing and then the other and then the other. But yeah, so I am curious about that.
Thank you so much. So the slot is open for everyone else. And as I said, Niraj, we're coming back to you. So any questions from the people in the Zoom? Barbara.
Yes, Barbara.
I don't have a question. It's just on your question. What came to my mind, I was just a few weeks ago, I was stumbling over a concept that's called volition. And I don't know if you heard about that, but that was for me a new eye-opening concept that is in this process of, like, so if I'm motivated and if I have an intent to do something, there are different steps in going forward. And one step is this volition, like this will, this strong mental will of doing something. And perhaps this could be like looking into that could help you on your question about how to build this conviction for someone.
Do you remember the Venn diagram I always show that you need I want, I can, I'm allowed? This is a Venn diagram I always used at Siemens, that when someone cannot, he or she can be educated. If someone is not allowed in corporate development, they are famous for doing submarines. They are just doing it because they want. But if someone doesn't want, and the triggers for wanting are different. Sometimes it's a pull factor that they see, or there is something really amazing. I recognize this at Stanford. You're surrounded by entrepreneurs and everyone is in this kind of startup field. You have a feeling of, oh, I have to do that too. And the impression it's easier, and there is a process and a framework and a support network. And sometimes it's pressure from the family. I think there is not one size fits all. And the most interesting element I currently found is something Sebastian Kernbach, he is at the D School from time to time in this life design ecosystem. He is addressing the knowing doing gap. I think there is, oh yeah, it would be good, I would love to, but, And I think this needs to have more attention. But are there any other thoughts on that by the others here in the call?
Yeah. So thank you, Barbara, and yeah, Bettina. I think that's what's helpful. The volition concept is interesting. Yeah. If you can send me some links, Barbara, that would be helpful about where you read that.
I would be interested too, Barbara.
Yeah, I was stumbling over it. I mean, there's a Wikipedia page to get into it. I can send that. I don't have like scientific papers.
I see. Okay.
But from there you can not yet. Yeah. But it's really like when you look into that, that's really also about very much about the self-awareness, because this volition, like this, how you create your will or how you manage your will. Yeah, it's something about your thoughts, about your feelings, about what you know, how you behave, and this is very much in this self-awareness and knowing yourself and knowing how the brain works, and react to if you had like a bad night, that is perhaps not the best day to do decisions, because the brain doesn't work as in another day. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. It's just unfortunate that Georg is not here today, and he is always he is focusing on what neuroscience also said in this context, and what is it? He is involved with the Züricher Ressourcenmodell, and as far as I know, they are also very much looking what could be barriers in your belief that hinders you to do it. It doesn't have to be real elements. It's just in your belief that many people are thinking, oh, would it be so good? And you have a lot of advantages. But if the people would not also elaborate what could be real and imaginary barriers that needs to be also considered. I would also have two questions. The first is, you are in a very luxury position, as from my perspective, being at Stanford in the ecosystem and having through the brand of Stanford access to these world-class guest speakers, as mentioned by one in the testimonials. Sometimes some of us, we are in a, oh, thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you.
She put, I will share it also.
I checked the English side, it's much less. So I posted a German side.
We do not have access to this world-class speaker. What would be your recommendation to approach then a class like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's, I think it would be a different course in that way. You know, it won't be very. I mean, if I were to do it course in a different ecosystem where I don't have access to the same speakers, my own preference would be to make it more of a real behavioral fitness course where we practice, where we do simulations, scenarios. That's one. And secondly, whatever speakers we do have access to, involve them in conversations. But I would change the nature of the course from a pedagogical standpoint to less emphasis on speakers, more on activities.
Really good one. The next question, I'm sorry because I'm so curious, but if someone else has a question. I bought the book, this really big book, and it starts with the challenging childhood of Elon Musk, and that he is struggling. So maybe not now, but what I see as a behavior in for example, in X, that he seems to be a person with own personality challenges and some challenges to people close to him, if it's partners, employees. How do you deal with that? Is this a role model? Because he's obviously very, very successful and very passionate and very driven.
Yes. He's not a role model for me. So that's one of the things what I feel is that this work that we're doing about behavioral fitness, where does it come into picture? That we have examples where you can say that people have succeeded because of behavioral fitness. We have examples where we can say people have succeeded in spite of lack of behavioral fitness. And there are certain examples where that is not just the condition that can help. I mean, it becomes a choice, really. We have seen examples where, I mean, Musk is one of them. The other person could be Steve Jobs, who was known to be famously demanding.
Yeah, I read the book by Bob Sutton.
By Bob Sutton, yes, yeah. So there to be outliers to some extent, have a perspective which turns out to be, effective in a way, that their vision, the kind of work they're doing leads to success financially and in the corporate world. But I don't think that's the kind of entrepreneurs we are aspiring to create or help. I am personally more motivated to have enlightened entrepreneurs who are able to not just lead to successful financial bottom lines or corporate results, but are able to create effective cultures and organizations. That's my bias, that's my purpose. But that's to say that that's not the only way. If you're just after success, there are other ways of achieving it too.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I stop the taping and we would come back to you. I'm meeting Barbara on Thursday.